She was 2 years old when they took her title away. In May of 1536, her mother was beheaded on the Green inside the Tower of London. Within weeks, Parliament declared the child illegitimate. She stopped being the Princess Elizabeth and became, in the language of the documents, the Lady Elizabeth. 22 years later, she was Queen of England. Almost everything you have heard about how she survived those 22 years is wrong. Not invented, exactly. Polished, shifted, repeated until the polish became the story. The truth is on paper, and it is worse. Her governess, Lady Bryan, wrote to Thomas Cromwell that summer that the child had neither gown, nor kirtle, nor petticoat, nor linen for smocks. That letter gets quoted as a portrait of an abandoned orphan. Read the whole of it, and it is something more ordinary and more revealing. It is an administrator fighting for a budget and fighting Sir John Shelton over who governed the child and where she dined. Nobody knew what she was anymore, so nobody knew what she was owed. In 1544, a new Act of Succession put her back in line for the throne after her brother Edward and her sister Mary. Her father's will confirmed it 2 years later. And here is what the retellings almost always get wrong. It did not make her legitimate. She was restored to the succession and left a bastard-in-law, and she stayed one, through her sister's reign, through her own coronation. To the end of her life, an heir who, on paper, was not supposed to exist. Henry died in January 1547. Elizabeth, 13, went to live with her stepmother Catherine Parr. Parr married, quickly and quietly, the Lord Admiral Thomas Seymour, the new king's uncle. What happened in that household we know from one source, and the source matters more than the story. 2 years later, Elizabeth's governess, Catherine Ashley, and her cofferer, Thomas Parry, were arrested, taken to the Tower, and questioned. Their confessions are what survive. Ashley deposed that at Chelsea the Admiral would come many mornings into Elizabeth's chamber before she was ready, and sometimes before she had risen. That he would pull back the bed curtains as though he would come at her, and that she would move further into the bed so that he could not. She deposed that at Hanworth, in the garden, he wrestled with the girl and cut her gown into 100 pieces. And she deposed what Elizabeth said when she was scolded for it. That she could not help it, that the Queen held her while the Lord Admiral cut it. Remember where that sentence comes from. A servant, imprisoned under interrogation, repeating what a 14-year-old girl had told her. It is evidence of what was said. It is not a photograph of what was done. Seymour was executed for treason in March 1549. Elizabeth 15 was interrogated for days and gave her questioners nothing. But she did write. In January, while Ashley and Parry were still in the Tower, she wrote to the Lord Protector that rumours were abroad that she was in the Tower herself, and with child by my Lord Admiral. "My Lord," she wrote, "these are shameful slanders." And she asked to be brought to court so that she could show herself there as she was. 3 weeks later, she wrote again. She asked him, if he thought it good, to send a proclamation into the counties telling people to hold their tongues and declaring how the tales be but lies. She would not name anyone. And she added that she was ashamed to ask again, because she could see he was not well minded to it. She was 15 years old, and she had already worked out that the accusation could not be argued with. It could only be outlasted and starved of air. Edward died in 1553. After 9 days of Jane Grey, Mary was Queen, and England was Catholic again. The court noticed at once what Elizabeth did not do. On the 27th of August, the Emperor's ambassadors in London wrote that Mass was sung at court 6 or 7 times a day, and that the Lady Elizabeth had not yet been present. 11 days later, she was. On the 8th of September, the feast of the Nativity of the Virgin, she went to Mass. and the ambassadors reported to Charles V what they had been told about how she went, that she tried to excuse herself, saying she was ill, that she complained all the way to church that her stomach ached, wearing a suffering air. That detail does not come from a Protestant writer building her a legend. It comes from the Catholic side, watching her, unconvinced. The Lord Chancellor had already told those same ambassadors what he thought, that events would prove whether she did it out of deceit and the better to play the game of which she was suspected. In January 1554, Thomas Wyatt raised Kent against the Queen's Spanish marriage. He reached Southwark in February, was turned back at Ludgate, and surrendered at Temple Bar. On the 18th of March, Elizabeth was taken to the Tower. The case against her was this, in total. Wyatt had sent her a letter, telling her to get herself as far from the city as she could. She had sent word back, thanking him, not in writing. That was all of it. The imperial ambassador, no friend of hers, wrote to the emperor that there was not sufficient evidence to condemn her, because the men who had plotted with her had fled the country. On the 11th of April, Wyatt was brought out to Tower Hill. A chronicler standing close enough to write it down recorded what he said, or words much like it in effect. That the rumour he had accused Elizabeth was not so good people, that neither she nor any other then in hold was privy to his rising. And then a royal chaplain on the scaffold shouted the meaning down. Wyatt was cut short. Whether they plucked him back by the gown, the chronicler wrote, is not well known. By that same afternoon, a contradictory version was being told in the Parliament House. Within weeks, a London apprentice was hauled before Star Chamber for repeating what Wyatt had actually said. He cleared her in public, and they buried it in a day. Wyatt was beheaded and quartered. On the 19th of May 1554, Elizabeth left the Tower. You will hear that she was released, and that it fell on the anniversary of her mother's execution, to the day. Both halves need care. The best evidence for the date is a letter written the following afternoon by a household steward, and it is good evidence. But no one alive in 1554 remarked on the coincidence. It was 18 years, almost certainly, to the day. And she was not released. She went by barge to Richmond, and from there to Woodstock, into the keeping of Sir Henry Bedingfeld. The Tower chronicler wrote that she remained there as prisoner. You will also hear that she was kept behind 5 or 6 locked doors. That comes from Foxy, and what Fox wrote was that there were 5 or 6 locks between her lodging and her walks. Bedingfeld's own letter book says something less theatrical and more useful. On the day she arrived, he complained that in the whole house there were but 3 doors only that were able to be locked and barred. He was not describing a fortress. He was complaining that he could not secure her. What he could control was her post. Mary's signed instructions forbade Elizabeth to receive or send any message, letter, or token to or from any manner of person. She was licensed to write to the Queen once. After that, her requests had to be dictated to Bedingfeld and sent through the Counsel, so that Mary might have the first sight of them. And once she asked him for a book. The Bible in English, of the smallest volume. He offered her Latin books instead. He thought, he wrote, that she should have more delight in those, seeing she understood Latin so well. He noted that she did not take the answer in good part. Half an hour later, in the garden, she called him her jailer. She was never tried. She was never cleared. She was simply kept. What kept her alive was not mercy. Mary wanted her disinherited. An Act of Parliament to declare her a bastard and put her out of the succession for good. It was Philip of Spain who opposed it and prevented it. The Venetian ambassador, reporting this in 1557, thought it implied, besides affection, some particular design on the part of the king. The design is not hard to read. Mary was childless. If Elizabeth was struck out, the next claimant to England was Mary, Queen of Scots, who was betrothed to the heir of France. Elizabeth survived because removing her would have handed England to the French. Twice Mary believed she was pregnant. Twice no child came. Mary died on the 17th of November, 1558. Elizabeth was 25. Within 4 days she had made William Cecil her principal secretary. The Spanish ambassador reported it to Philip on the 21st. She had given the secretaryship to Cecil and sworn him of her counsel. And a paper survives among the state papers recording the charge she gave him, that he should not be corrupted with any manner of gift, that he would be faithful to the state, and that, without respect of her private will, he would give her the counsel that he thought best. She was 2 years old when they took her title away. She had spent 22 years being told what she was not. The first thing she did with power was ask to be told the truth. Elizabeth survived. Her mother did not, nor did the Queen who came before her mother. But what if they had? What if Catherine of Aragon had not died at Kimbolton in 1536? What if Anne Boleyn had walked out of the Tower alive? That is the story I tell in my novel, Divorced Not Dead This Time. Everything you have just heard is what the documents say happened. The book is what might have. You will find it linked below. And if you want more of both, the true history and the fiction that grows out of it, subscribe. There is a great deal more of this to come.